A warm welcome to the Find Your Fire tribe. Here we are at another Fire Friday. And today I have with me a very special, amazing guest. Could you all mute yourselves for me if you're not already muted? It would help us a lot. Thank you so much. For those people who have not seen me before, and I don't think there are too many of those, I'm Wendy Yawching. I am founder of Healing Spaces Caribbean, also known as the tribe mom of the Find Your Fire tribe. And on a regular basis, we ask, invite, and entertain special chi elevating people into the tribe. And today with me, I have Gennike Mayers. And I have to say, I consider her, she's a Trini woman, but I consider her a woman of the Caribbean, a woman actually of the world. She has the most fascinating life story. And as I think she's going to share that with you. Gennike has lived and worked in Haiti and Martinique and Guadeloupe and Zimbabwe and Tobago. Gennike has a master's in communication. She's able in English, of course, French, Spanish, and I believe Haitian Creole. Is that how you say it, Gennike?
Creole. It's like a splinter.
And my first experience with her, I had met her before in Tobago, but my first real awareness of Gennike was when she started posting the story online of her long journey back from Zimbabwe, where she was living. And then I think she sort of escaped before there was a coup. And she was coming back in the time of COVID to Trinidad, where the borders were closed, and journaling for us all to see her journey. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to Gennike. Gennike, I am so happy to have you with us. Perhaps you could tell us what you were doing in Zimbabwe and about the journey back. And then we get a little further into your life. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Wendy, for the introduction and for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to chat with you and your tribe. And congrats on being a tribe mom. So as you mentioned, yes, you kind of started hearing about me when I was in Zimbabwe. I was out there working with the UN, was supposed to be for a 6-month contract. And then COVID happened and took the world by storm. And so I got stuck there, not only because of COVID, but because my passport went mysteriously missing the very first week that I got there. So I found myself in a very peculiar situation of wanting to return home for various reasons, including rumors of another coup. A very dear friend of mine over there had been arrested, and so it was very real to me. And I did not want to stay a moment longer in Zimbabwe, albeit it was a really good job that I enjoyed with the United Nations in a country that I was growing to love. But I made the decision to get out of there and try to make my way home. I say try to make my way home because Trinidad and Tobago's borders were also closed at that time. And so it was a period where you had to get a special exemption from the Ministry of National Security to be able to get back in. I think maybe this sounds like a very distant memory now, but it was not easy. And it was not an obvious thing to do. So I left Zimbabwe not knowing exactly how or when I would be able to get back home. But I made a bet with myself that once I could land in the Caribbean region, I would feel at home and I could somehow possibly whether find a boat, fishing boat or helicopter or by some means, I could figure out how to get back to Trinidad. So that was a bet that I made. Get to Guadeloupe. Luckily, I lived there previously, so I have many friends there who opened their doors to me. So, I didn't have to, live out of pocket per se. But that period did last for a lot longer than I expected. I left Zimbabwe on the 25th of July, and I did not return to Trinidad until the 2nd of October. So I was out for a few months, not knowing when I'd be able to come home and also not knowing exactly what I was coming home to do, having resigned my job. So there begins the start of my other story. What have I been doing, since I got back here?
I have questions for you before that. I want to know what you were doing in Zimbabwe in the first place. Now, everyone, Gennike, with her master's in communication, became a communication specialist and was doing all kinds of exciting things for UN and International Red Cross. But Zimbabwe, over to you, Gennike.
So yes, I had an opportunity to work with UN Office for Project Services in Zimbabwe. It so happened that there was a cyclone that hit Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique in 2018. And so there was a big recovery operation ongoing there. They needed someone for communications, and I got that position. As I said, it was just for 6 months. My job was to basically go set up a communications team with local staff, put the systems in place, make sure everything was up and running. And then we had agreed beforehand that I would come back home. One of the things that I pay particular attention to is putting systems in place and also working with local staff. There's no reason to pay an international staffer, as was the case for me, if you have local staff who are equally qualified. And so while I was happy to go in and do what I did, I didn't want to stay there any longer than I needed to, because it just goes against my own principles of giving priority to local staff in their country. And so that was a plan until COVID happened.
And then Gennike, obviously, for you to have been called to Zimbabwe to do this, you had done this kind of running into places where there had been emergencies or national disasters before. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So to backtrack a bit, I have been working in the communication space now for about 20 years. The Masters in Communications did open up some additional doors for me, but I was already working in that area before I had that qualification. And that's something I like to point out, because I know we tend to emphasize a lot academic qualifications, which are worthwhile. But what I have found in my journey along the way, it's more the personal relationships that we build that open doors. And that has always been my experience. Yes, I had the qualifications, but that job in Zimbabwe actually came through a personal connection, someone who I had met in a mission in Haiti back in 2010. And who remembered me, who remembered the work that I was doing in Haiti. I worked with Red Cross at the time. He was working with a UN agency at the time. And when this opportunity came up, he did reach out and invited me to apply 10 years later. So that just goes to show it's the personal connections. People do remember you as a person. They don't remember your qualifications. They remember how you've done a job, how you've treated people. And I think that's what opened the door for me to go to Zimbabwe.
And your ethics, they remember that as well, how you handle things. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming such a communication specialist and to working in the UN, etc.?
So let me try to be as brief as I can about it. I actually started with a passion for languages, foreign languages. So my undergrad would have been in French. But even before that, I had the unique opportunity, fresh out of high school at age 17, to intern with, back in the day was known as AVM Television, with veteran journalists. So I started working straight out of high school. My parents at the time couldn't afford to send me to university. So I opted for that working experience. And also I needed to set aside the money. I wanted to go to university. So I thought, okay, let me do this job, set aside some funds. And in so doing, working in this television station for 2 years, I felt that this was something I wanted to pursue. So the journalistic field, but combined with languages. And so it didn't become obvious right away, but over time I realized, yes, if I combine journalism, broadcasting with my foreign languages, I could probably end up like an Anderson Cooper somewhere, far away with my language skills. That was one of my adolescent dreams that I carried with me into university. So I already had that mindset of wanting to combine communications with the foreign languages. And again, doors opened up for me through the personal relationships that I was able to build with people along the way, from Martinique, Guadeloupe, Trinidad and Tobago. We had at one period a lot of delegations that were coming in from overseas. That was at the time when Trinidad and Tobago was really opening up itself to doing trade with Latin America in particular, and with the wider Caribbean region. And so I had the opportunity to meet a lot of these business delegations that were coming in to Trinidad. And I always kept people's call cards. And so when I did have the opportunity to go to those countries, I let them know ahead of time, hey, I'm going to be in your country. Can we meet up? And sure enough, people, were always open to meet. And whenever opportunities came up, they would think of me. And that's just how I've been able to evolve in the humanitarian space.
And then you came back to Tobago and COVID happened, or COVID was happening.
COVID was happening worldwide, and I returned home. So, as I said, I resigned from the job, and I came back not really knowing what I was going to do next. But I really was quite fearful for what could possibly happen in Zimbabwe. And then I thought to myself, if I were to get ill with COVID, I don't want my parents to have to try to figure out how to bring my body back. Honestly, that was my first thought. My parents were, aging, and I didn't want them to have to figure those logistics out. So I thought, let me get back home. If something should happen, at least I'm nearer to home in the Caribbean. What also happened along the way is I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. That's another social network, but as I say, it's a place where business people socialize. And I saw at one point this new company called Kudo. Kudo is a multilingual platform, a multilingual meeting platform along the lines of Zoom. And I saw that they had this new platform online. And so while I was still in Zimbabwe, I started the certification process with them because I thought, okay, this is a skill that I want to have. I want to know how to use this platform. Come what may, it can always serve a purpose. And so while I was trying to get back home, I was also getting certified in this Kudo platform, which is I would say, one of the best multilingual meeting platforms. And they offer the additional opportunity whereby you can work with them as a freelancer as part of their marketplace. So while I was still a bit in limbo, I did start working freelance with Kudo from Guadeloupe, from Barbados, and eventually when I got back home to Tobago. And that is really something that was a game changer for me, because of course the entire world had gone online. All of the meetings, including multilingual meetings, went online. And so I was able to just insert myself into that space when I got back home. So I didn't have to figure out for too long, like, how am I going to earn a living now? That platform just popped up and the opportunity came my way.
And you took it. You stepped right in. You stepped up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you came back into Tobago, and you didn't, are you still with Kudo? Or because I know you started your own company. Are you still with Kudo? Is that under the umbrella of Kudo, or is it all, on its own? Tell us.
So one of the things about interpreting as a profession that has really evolved thanks to COVID is that you now have so many different multilingual meeting platforms. So we have Zoom, MS Teams has multilingual functions, there's Kudo, Interprify, Interactive. I can give you a whole list of new platforms that just sprouted out of nowhere during the COVID pandemic. And so I continue to work with Kudo as a freelancer, as I do with some of the other platforms. It really just depends on the client's preference, what tool they prefer to work with, or what tool they're accustomed to working with. But I did go ahead and revamp this company that I had registered since 2015. That was another period where I had returned home. I was working in Haiti. This was in the closeout of the earthquake operations in 2015. And so I returned to Trinidad at that time. And I was inspired to just go register a company called Interpreting Your Needs. That remained on paper dormant all of these years. But when I returned to Tobago in 2020, I thought, okay, this is the time to revive this company. And, I'm just going to put all my balls in this basket, all my eggs in this basket. And, this is going to be my primary occupation, because of course, businesses were closed. There was nowhere to go, nothing else to do pretty much. But, the bills are still coming. So that was my strategy for being able to pay the bills, and also being able to do what I absolutely enjoy. So Interpreting Your Needs is my company. It's alive and well. We're going into our 2nd year anniversary of active multilingual services. And so far, so good. I am glad that I was forced into this solution, because if not, it might have still just been a company on paper.
And before interpreting your needs and before COVID, the world was all personal presence. You had to be there. You had to be at the UN, at the Summit of the Americas. You had to be at the heads of state. You had to be present. They were not dealing with distance interpreting, correct? It was all very
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And, let me just dovetail on that by saying, for most of my career, so I served as a communication specialist, but I always had this deal with my employers from the get-go, from the interview process. I always told my future employers, listen, I have this skill set that I need to maintain. So although I'm interviewing for a job as communication specialist or whatever have you, I need to be able to take time off from time to time, whether it's 1 day or 2 days a month. If I get a call to go do a conference somewhere, I want to have the flexibility to be able to perform as an interpreter, because if I don't maintain the skill set, I'm going to lose it. And, I worked really hard to acquire this level of proficiency. And so it's always a discussion that I had with my future employers. I'm happy to say that I still did manage to get the job in communications most of the time. And so whenever those opportunities to do interpreting came up, I didn't have to pussyfoot about it or hide. I just told my employer, look, I have a request for a conference in Barbados or St. Lucia or wherever have you. I would like to go. And so it was great that I had that flexibility, even as an employee in different organizations working in communication.
So it sounds like you had a most fascinating and amazing life. Now that you're doing it all online and you're doing it from your home base in Tobago, correct?
Yes, from here, from my home office. Yes.
Do you miss that, being present, going to Barbados, going to Haiti, going to rescue people or help support the rescue efforts in a disaster zone? Do you miss that that hands-on excitement, the energy of it? Or are you happy to be home with your dogs and the sea outside and do the work?
That's a trick question. But when I just returned in 2020, sincerely, after all the drama that happened in Zimbabwe, I didn't want to go anywhere. I felt safe, and I just wanted to sit still in the midst of the COVID pandemic, all of the uncertainty. And, I lost loved ones, people that I know very close to me who died from COVID and who also died during the pandemic. So it took me like those last 2 years, I didn't want to go anywhere. Quite sincerely, I think I'd had enough of the living out of a suitcase and traveling all over the place, not for leisure, but for work, and most often in very stressful, intense, demanding scenarios. So I'm glad for that break. I can say now, 2023, I'm starting to feel a little bit differently about travel. I do feel more optimistic about leaving the comfort and safety of home, and being able to travel once more. But of course, I have new responsibilities with my dogs, so I have to negotiate that with them. But it is something that I do look forward to. Right now, travel entails more going to Trinidad. Businesses are back open again, and in terms of the conference circuit, a lot of the regional mechanisms are having big meetings again. So I did travel last year, just when there was, the borders were open again. I went to Suriname twice for, one was a CARICOM heads of government meeting, another was a UNDP meeting. So I have already begun that, but in terms of traveling for longer term missions, not just yet, because it does require some logistics.
Yes, now that you have a home base and 2 dogs waiting for you. Folks, Gennike has 2 rescue dogs, one called Faith and one called Vision, who happens to not have any vision. Vision is a blind dog, correct? And so she is very attached to her home and her puppets.
I want to say that Vision is a visionary, and while she does not have sight, she certainly has vision. I tell everybody she sees with her nose, she sees with her ears, and she's fiery. She's a very, very sensitive dog. So yes, that's my little girl.
Yes. I have a story about Vision, but I will share it at another time. Okay, so Gennike, I know that your heart is here, your home is here, but it seems to me that the world is still yours with your skill set and with your company. Your world is still yours. And I think that there's a part of you that is also drawn to rise to the occasion when crises call. I feel that you would not be overwhelmed going into a disaster zone to help and do your magic. Is that something that you would want to do in the future?
To be sincere, yes. I am on the international roster for disaster response for the International Red Cross. That I've been on the roster since 2011. What that means is basically there's a pool of persons who are identified by their different competencies, and so when there's a disaster anywhere in the world, we get alerts on our phone, and so just over that.
That adrenaline rush. Do you want to go? Do you want to go? How do you feel when you get that alert?
I do. And then I have to remind myself, Gennike, you have a home, you have 2 dogs, and it's not that easy to, get someone to stay with my dog. So, without getting to those details, because my dog is blind, I don't want to uproot her from a routine and a place that she knows. So it does require some logistical arrangement. But every time I get an alert, and I specifically got one to go to Madagascar last month in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Freddy, which did a double whammy because it hit the first time Madagascar, then it went around and it hit Malawi on the second turn. And so they were calling for communications professionals. In the first place, Madagascar, they needed a French-speaking comms person, which is my profile, Malawi as well. So the opportunities are there, but it requires a different kind of organization. Yeah, and yes, my heart still pounds whenever I get those alerts, but I have to also recognize that
no, we understand.
I'm at a different age and a different stage of life. So yes, I'm still here, rooted in Tobago.
Well, you are not alone, okay? When I retired from flying, it took me 4 times going back before I was able to give it up completely. Every time the phone rang, after a couple of years of being stable and responsible and rooted in Tobago, the phone would ring and they'd say, "We need you." And I go, "Okay." So it is something when you there's something inside of you that rises to that. And I tend to follow my heart. And I have a feeling when you are ready, you will continue to follow your heart in that area. Perhaps, of course, you can do both. You can do a mix and choose your projects. But I don't see you giving it up completely just yet. I just don't. But okay, so we had a question because the name of this session was "I Must Have Been Crazy." Gennike, why did you call it that?
I have often heard this from friends, strangers, family members. "You must be crazy. Are you crazy? You must really be missing a few screws." That's probably the most common remark that I've heard from people, again, in my closest circle. And though they know me very well, and they know that I've never been a St. Anne's outpatient or inpatient, that's the most common thing I've heard. I like to think of myself as somebody who has crazy faith. I would definitely say I have crazy faith to do things that appear crazy to others, but I'm definitely not crazy. I am a stable genius.
What were they referring to when you went off to the disaster zones, or when you came back to Tobago and started IYN or revisited IYN? What were they referring to?
This has been ongoing since my teens, actually. Since my teenage years, I've been doing quote unquote crazy things. But those things are simply taking advantage of the opportunities. As you just said, Wendy, something in me rises to the occasion that presents itself. And for me, those occasions that appear crazy to most people are opportunities. And I think I've been really blessed that somehow I have been in a constant state of preparedness to take advantage of those opportunities when they arise. I think maybe one of the craziest things, and my parents were really very concerned at the time. Everybody was wondering about my insurance and kind of delicately asking me, well, what happens if you get kidnapped or whatever, and really having to have those conversations. Yeah, I had to have those conversations with the people around me to reassure them that, listen, I got this, right? So when the Haiti earthquake happened in 2010, I was working with the Red Cross in Trinidad. It so happens that I had just left a media house when I started working at the Red Cross. And so all my media colleagues, my former media colleagues, were calling me to find out, well, hey, we heard about this earthquake. What's happening? Can you give us like an inside scoop and all of that? I'm like, yeah, well, okay, we're just getting information. And the inside scoop turned out to be, okay, Gennike is going to Haiti. And so everybody, those colleagues, they were like, are you crazy? What are you going there to do? It's rubble everywhere, But I did feel that need to go because I have a unique skill set, communications and French, and I wanted to go to Haiti to help. So genuinely, I think I didn't think much about anything else. I just went there within 48 hours. I landed in Haiti on the 12th of January 2010 and did what I had to do. I think that's maybe one of the more outstanding sort of, are you crazy scenarios. But yes, you touched on another one, going to Zimbabwe. Are you crazy? Because they as well have a sort of sordid political past with a history of attempted and enacted coups. And so the question was, yeah, what are you going there to do? And then again, when I left, are you crazy? You left a job with the UN, paying in US dollars, coming home to do what? What are you coming here to do?
And the borders are still closed.
And the borders are still closed. And up to a week before I traveled, I had no passport. So I literally was making plans without having a passport.
But you went with faith.
I did go with faith. Now, Bible says faith without works is dead. So yes, I have the faith, but I also was, sort of behind the scenes frantically trying to get myself a new passport, reaching out to our diplomatic missions in Geneva, New York, Trinidad, harassing everybody to get a passport to get back home. So I don't think that was crazy. I just think that as you said, I rose to the occasion. Scenario presented itself. I made a choice, and these are all choices. I could have chosen to stay. That was another option. I could have chosen to stay, but I have my reasons for my choices, and I'm somebody who I assume my choices, whatever the consequences. I assume my choices, and I think so far I haven't done too badly.
Gennike, there's some people, people are different, and there are people who, when there's a crisis and emergency, will run away from it. And there are people who will turn around and run towards it. I think you are one of those people who runs towards it, knowing that you can help. And whatever the aspect of help is, those people run towards it, whether you're medical, whether you're interpreter, whether you are capable of lifting heavy objects off of fallen people, whether you have the rescue dog. There are certain people who will run towards it. I put you in the category of people who will run towards the situation where you can help, regardless of how bad and how crazy it might seem to others. But those are the people that are absolutely critical and are needed. So kudos to you. Kudos to you. Now, what more do you see for yourself in the next couple of years? If you say interpreting your needs, otherwise known as IYN, is stable and is doing well, but you are feeling the pull of those little calls when things are happening around the world, and they're going to keep happening. Unfortunately, that's where we are. What do you see? If you could map your dream for interpreting your needs, what would you put together?
Well, Wendy, you called it into being. You spoke it, earlier this week, and so I'm gonna say it out loud publicly. It has been one of my childhood aspirations to work with the UN as an interpreter. So I have worked with the UN, but not as an interpreter to date. And so that is still a dream of mine that I wish to pursue. And as I said, faith without works is dead. So as I speak, I have already sat one of the interpreting exams. I have another one coming up next month. And so I am believing and working towards securing a post as a UN interpreter. Now, what does that mean for my own company? Well, the business model is such that I work with a network of freelancers that before COVID used to be freelancers based in Trinidad and Tobago. But now, thanks to COVID and thanks to all the multilingual platforms, I actually have been able to expand the network of freelancers I work with to global connections. So whether I am in Tobago or Geneva or Nairobi or someplace, hopefully someplace warm, because I don't do cold too well. But I am able to keep the company going, keep the business going, thanks to the interpreters I work with, who can be assigned to jobs as they come up, while I take on another job. But I want to speak that into being, and I think that's going to be the next natural step for me.
We are speaking it into being as we speak. Now, can you explain, because it's not clear, Terry sent you a heart, it's not clear, what's the difference between a communication specialist at the UN and an interpreter at the UN? For people who are thinking about this as a career path, it's important information.
Sure. So the word communications, I guess it can be all encompassing and vague at the same time. This speaks more to the field of public relations. Sometimes it's called public information. So it's more like along the lines of having, let's say, a company journalist. You are a journalist or a public relations expert that is trying to raise the visibility of your organization, whether it's a private company or whether it's the United Nations or the Red Cross where I worked previously. It basically entails creating what we know today as creating content, writing stories, putting together photo journalistic reports, so photos, and of course now with the advent of social media, posting videos, etc., that would really highlight the mandate of the organization or highlight the projects of that organization. So that's what communications involves. It's in its simplest form, it's like being a journalist for internally for an organization. Whereas interpreting, this really speaks to the linguistic skill of being able to listen to a speech or a presentation in one language and be able to decode that and deliver it in a target language. So in my case, the combination that I work most often in is English French. So that could be I'm listening to someone speaking in English and I am interpreting that into French for French speakers who are listening in with headsets, like I'm wearing headsets. So French English is the combination I work most in, but I do work as well in Spanish, whether it's Spanish English, or French Spanish. I am working on really getting my Spanish fluency up to par or on par with French for interpreting. If I can explain that real briefly, because people tend to think, well, once you speak a few languages, you can interpret. That's not the case. You can have a certain level of fluency that allows you to converse comfortably with people, whether it's in a informal setting or for business meetings. But when you're speaking about simultaneous interpretation, which means that you have 4 processes going on in your brain at the same time. You're listening to the speaker in one language. Your brain is taking in what I like to call decoding what that person is saying, extracting meaning, finding the equivalent of that meaning in a foreign language, then delivering through your mouth because you're speaking out in a foreign language. And while those 3 are going on, you are still monitoring what is the next thing that speaker is saying. So you're self-checking while you're speaking the foreign language, right? So it's 4 processes going on at the same time. It's a highly stressful job. It requires a much higher level of proficiency than simply being able to converse with someone in Spanish or French or whatever language it is. So that would be the distinct difference between what I did before as communication specialist, more along the journalistic lines, and what I'm doing now and hope to continue doing, which is really more in the linguistic field.
And this is your interpreting is hugely important, because this is a step of which wars are, say, made or not made. The interpretation, I mean, you can affect the outcome because of the understanding of the recipient is affected by how you produced it. So that is huge.
Absolutely. And Wendy, if you'll allow me, there's a famous anecdote that I think all interpreters refer to. It was an interpreter who worked with French President François Mitterrand, sorry. And at the time, there was some debate in the public forum in the newspapers about what the French president said. And the interpreter came out and said, I didn't say what the president said. I said what he should have said.
Oh my
Now
God.
that is really brave for an interpreter to come out and say that. But the fact of the matter is, there is a level of diplomacy that interpreters exercise by the choice of words.
Yes.
And if you choose I don't want to say the wrong word, but if you choose the word that doesn't convey the full meaning of or the nuance that is being communicated, which kind of needs some level of mind reading too, because you're listening to somebody talking, they're, whether they're reading a speech or they're talking off the cuff, you kind of have to figure out what is the intention behind what's being said, what's the real deeper meaning of what's being said, and you then have to find the words to try to convey that in a foreign language. So there's always a margin of error. There is always a bit of risk when I choose one word over another to convey meaning into a foreign language. So yes, it is the stuff that can prevent wars or make wars.
Change the course of history. And what if you are interpreting for someone whose politics you don't really approve of, and they say whatever they say, and you really resist it internally yourself? I can think of a couple of politicians who I might feel that way about. And then yet you are required to present it to somebody else who you know they are going to be offended by what was said. You really, it's kind of like you are, in a way, you're supposed to be a pure energy worker and just allow things to come in, translate, and come out. But it's important. It's really, I don't know how you could do that as a human being when you have your own feelings about what's being said and what you would like to happen in the world. So it's actually a very fascinating position to be in, Gennike, and a very powerful position to be in.
Well, you say powerful. I would say it's humbling, and at the same time, it requires us to be neutral. And it's funny because I've over the years, I've done talks with, career guidance sessions, and the question I get asked most often has to do with this: what happens if you don't like what the person said? Will you interpret it? And the answer is absolutely, absolutely yes, because I am simply the mouthpiece. I'm a filter. I'm not the one saying it.
That's
And
what.
so I have met people over the years who have been, qualified, who are extremely fluent in different languages, but they've made the choice not to serve as an interpreter, not to pursue the route of interpreting, simply because they don't want to find themselves in a position where there may be a conflict of interest, or whether it's to do with politics or religion or whatever have you. And so they've opted out of that interpreting role because they don't want certain things coming out of their mouth. I would I would say yes. No, I would say that, again, you have whatever the language is, you always have options in a language. And so you may hear something that's extremely crude in one language. It doesn't mean that you have to render as crude as you heard. You can go the softer route by communicating the meaning, but with a softer, more acceptable, more palatable word. And that's where, you really have to master the languages that you're working in, that you have a register that goes from highly formal to informal to, street language, slang, gang, so you have to be able to master those nuances in both languages that you're working in.
Gennike, this is what you are running towards. So what I'm saying, you are actually living what I was suggesting. When there's a challenge and excitement and drama and risk, you are running towards it. So I see you as an interpreter. How soon would you like it? We'll call for it. This year?
2023. 2023. Yes, 2023.
Now, folks, we have
cheers to that.
Cheers to that. This amazing woman, we're going to open to anybody in the group that has questions. This amazing woman is also an author, and I think you can see a published author. And I think you can see she's going to have many more books in her before she's done with the stories that are to come. And she is also, I think, Gennike, you're creating and selling fine pastels in Tobago or Trinidad and Tobago. So talk about multi-talented and a rich and full life. Would anybody have any questions for Gennike in the room? I'm checking on Facebook. Anybody want to ask her any questions or say anything to her? I'm going to go back to gallery view. Oops.
Wendy, while you're scrolling through the feedback, there's something that came into mind that I always like to share. And it is just the concept of a language reading. As we spoke, my goal at the end of the day is to encourage people to learn a foreign language. Anybody can do it. I'm not, particularly exceptional in that regard. Anybody can learn a foreign language, and it's something I encourage people to do. It doesn't mean that you have to master the language to the level of becoming an interpreter, but certainly if you enjoy meeting people, learn a language. You get to meet that many more people simply by speaking an additional language. There's a quote from Nelson Mandela that is very dear to me. He's quoted as saying, when you speak to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. But when you speak to a man in his own language, it goes to his heart. And that is something that has always guided me. As I said earlier in the chat, you can have all of the qualifications in the world, and they certainly do serve a purpose. But what has really been instrumental for me along my career path and my personal path is the ability to connect with people and really have heart connections. I go very quickly from complete stranger to best buddy. You skip a lot of stages very quickly when you speak that person's language, because there's just this, it's a heart connection. You quickly gain trust when you can speak to someone in their own language, even if they may speak your language. But the fact that you make the effort to communicate with them in their language, you get extra brownie points for that. So it's something that I wanted to share with the folks in your tribe. Whatever age or stage of life you're at, if you just like meeting people, go learn another language. There's so many easy ways and different apps you can download to your phone right now. Duolingo is one of them. I'm actually using Duolingo for Portuguese because I want to add another language. I may never be able to serve as an interpreter in Portuguese, but I want to be able to speak some good Portuguese and go to Brazil,
With that lovely quote from Nelson Mandela, I have to say thank you. We have a couple comments in the chat, no questions, which means that you answered everything in advance. We have fascinating from Terry, and we have Josiane saying, Gennike, it was a pleasure hearing your story. Continued success to you and your business. All right. So
thank you.
Gennike, you're always amazing. Gennike, you are always.
Go ahead, Christina.
I recognize that voice. Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, I happen to think she's a super lady myself.
Yes, Gennike, you have always been a mentor to me. I mean,
Christine and I go way back, and I would say the same. Christine has been blazing a trail for herself, and
yes.
Wendy.
So, Gennike, kudos to you. Work and
Christine's having a few tech issues.
Thank you. Yes, I see that. Thank you, Christine.
That's the message, Christine, and we appreciate it very, very much. Anybody else want to say something to Gennike before we say goodbye?
Hi, Gennike. This is Garlene. I believe we share the same alma mater. I wanted to ask you, would you agree that when you are able to speak in another language, you can almost have a different personality as well? It's like you're able to express yourself in a totally different way. I was chatting with some of my co-workers who are teachers and the French teachers, and every time they start to speak in their French, they get so animated, and the entire staff room, they just stop and they look at them because they're all over the place.
Moving, my God.
Yes, exactly. So I often felt that is probably one of the joys of speaking another language. You almost get to become someone else. I don't know what you can say on that.
You get the flavor.
Absolument. Absolument. C'est tout à fait vrai. Yes. Yeah. Now, some people might look on and say these people are schizophrenic, but again, no.
They would say it must be crazy. That crazy word again.
It must be crazy. Yes. There you go. But no, you hit the nail right on the head, and you've noticed it yourself. It's like they take on a completely different persona. I know in my case, what tends to happen is my tone changes. So I have a much lower tone in French. I tend to be more of an alto in French. When I speak Spanish, it's a little bit higher. English is kind of in
Right.
between. So, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know what accounts for it really. It's just something that I've observed. But yeah, you can take on whole other personalities.
Never thought of picking up Italian so you could really wave your arms around.
You know what? I tried. I was on a cruise ship. It was a Costa Cruise Line run by Italians. And I've also worked with a lot of Italian Red Cross colleagues in Haiti. And so, you know, just listening to them, trying to mimic them. Yeah, part of it is mimicking the sound, but it's all, you know, all the hands and the,
Well,
it's very expressive. Yes. I did try that. I did.
Anyway, folks,
thank you so much.
I want to thank you all for being here, for those who watch us on Facebook, and Gennike particularly for sharing all of that amazing stuff with us. You've excited me. I'm all like, I want to run off and go rescue the next, you know, so I want to get involved again into that kind of life. For me, it would be more in terms of, you know, evacuating people by airplane. That's my thing, rather than you know, what you do. But it's sort of
To each her own.
yes,
Each her own.
that excitement was catching for me. So now you have me all fired up to do stuff like that again. But it also was an amazing journey, a very, very fascinating story, and one that I think you're still creating it, you're still writing it, and I see only wonderful things to come, amazing things. I want to read that second book. All right. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today and your future. Many, many blessings. And to all of you who joined us, thank you for being here with us. Really enjoyed your energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
Bye.
you.